Hi, I'm Nick Haig, and welcome to the world's greatest business thinkers podcast. For more than 30 years, Tiffani Bova has stood at the forefront of business transformation across multiple industries and regions, specializing in driving top-line growth, sales transformation, and catalyzing customer and employee experience. Her tenure as a distinguished analyst and research fellow at Gartner saw her significantly aiding major tech firms like Microsoft, Cisco, and AWS in market expansion and revenue growth, resulting in billions of dollars in new revenue streams. Following Gartner, she served as the global growth and innovation evangelist at Salesforce, focusing on fostering customer success within its extensive global ecosystem. Tiffani is the acclaimed author of 2 Wall Street Journal bestsellers, Growth IQ, and The Experience Mindset, that we'll be talking about today. Her accolades are extensive, including 3 times being voted a Thinkers 50 recipient as one of the top business thinkers in the world. Over her career, she's delivered over 1,000 keynotes across 6 continents, and so you can see she's a highly sought after speaker, and therefore I'm overjoyed she's found time to speak to me today on this podcast. Welcome to the world's greatest business thinkers podcast, Tiffani.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Well, I am thrilled. I'm delighted. I finally got the chance to speak to you on my podcast. I know you're incredibly busy, but with customer experience, employee experience, it's a real passion of mine for over 25 years. And having followed your work, love all that you do. So when I read the book, The Experience Mindset, you showcase, this balance of focus on employee experience, EX, and customer experience, CX, and show how this can really benefit companies' revenues and profits. Then I just thought, people have got to listen to this. I've got to get you on the show. So before we dive into that, could you give our listeners some background to who you are? What's set you on this trail of being the CX and EX evangelist?
Oh, we don't have enough time. It's been a crazy long journey, but I would say this. I have been a huge advocate for brands understanding the value and power of the experience they provide to customers, having impact on their ability to sell, to service, and to maintain and grow customer accounts. And that customer centricity and customer focus, it's not something I created. It was something I agreed with. So I'm like, I want to learn more about this. And it became something that I worked towards when I was a practitioning leader. And then when I was a research fellow at Gartner for about a decade, my area of coverage was the impact of digital to the way brands engage and sell and work through and sell through partners. But I will tell you, it was not until I joined Salesforce, which I'm no longer there, but I was there for about 8 years. And maybe about 7 or 8 months in, I realized that I had completely missed the largest aspect of delivering great customer experience, and that is really the employees. Now, you might say it's painfully obvious. Obviously, you need happy employees to create happy customers. And if you get that right, you're going to have this flywheel effect. It's not lost on me that it's obvious. But what wasn't obvious at what parts of the employee's day-to-day has the greatest impact on that customer experience. And so it just took me down this path that was unexpected. My first book, Growth IQ, didn't mention employee experience at all. So my second book, The Experience Mindset, was kind of a mea culpa to the fact that I totally missed employee experience completely in my first one, which was everything you needed to know about growth. Except I forgot something. So, that's kind of how that happened.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was that aha and light bulb moment for me. Reading the book, I'd always known it. I'm a career market researcher. Fell in love with what CX is about and customer experience through doing customer satisfaction surveys back in the day. This was way before Fred Reichhold and the whole NPS movement. But in conjunction with that, we were always doing employee surveys, and where we've run similar surveys with companies, we could always see that correlation between data. Happy employees realized and delivered, delights and satisfied customers. But it wasn't on a grand scale. And we're going to get into this, but, the survey and the research that you've done really does bring that to life. So that was the enthusiasm for reaching out in the first instance. I think a good starting point for today's conversation is to hear just your thoughts firsthand on what customer experience means to you, and also what are the key characteristics that people need to deliver on to get this world-class customer experience.
Yeah, I'm going to start really at the basics, because I think that where sometimes this conversation falls apart is they go, I don't really understand what customer experience is. I mean, I kind of understand, like, obviously you want your customers to be happy, but, so I'm going to ask you listeners, the last time you caught an Uber, and if I'm in front of an audience, giving a keynote, I'll say, oh, hey, raise your hand if you've caught an Uber in the last 30 days. And, almost, or in a Lyft, something like that, right? Almost 80% of the hands will go up, regardless of size audience. And they'll say, okay, leave your hands up for a second. How many of you remember what you paid? And most hands go down. So maybe 10% of the hands, 15% that remain up. Those are the fiscally responsible human beings. And then I'll say, okay, everybody look around now. Everyone put your hands back up, right? And it could be hundreds of people in the room. And I say, how many, right? So now hundreds of people in the room. How many of you remember what you paid? Maybe 15 hands stay up. Now I say, okay, everybody put your hands back up. How many of you remember if the driver was too talkative, the car was smelly, you feared for your life, the music was too loud, or it was a great experience, and most all hands stay up?
Yeah.
Then I'll say, okay, if you went to a restaurant and the food was spectacular and the service was terrible, how many of you would go back? And then I say, if the food was good and the service was spectacular, how many of you would go back? And if you're answering that question in your mind, that is the power of that experience, that regardless of the price of that product, how good the product was, the experience is almost equal at this point to the value of the product it is that you're buying.
Yeah.
How hard is it to buy it online? Makes you not want to buy it again, even if it's a great product. Or, returning a product is not easy. So now you don't want to buy that product because the return is such a hassle. Or, in airline, you could rattle over and over in our consumer lives, subconsciously, we make decisions not only on the products we're buying, but on the experience. High-end hotel across the street from a mid-level hotel. They do the same job. It's a place to sleep when you're away from home. Why do you pay the premium if you can afford it, right? Why do you pay the premium? Because it's a better experience, right? They know your name. They remember your breakfast order. They will go the extra mile for you. They'll set up dinner reservations for you. All these things, that's all the experience, which is very different than across the street where the job is, I need a place to sleep when I'm out of town, but I'm going to forego all those frill experiences because that's not maybe one of my levers. So I give that as an example because now I ask you to think about what was your last best experience. And I don't care what kind of industry, hotel, travel, your doctor's office, your dentist, your dry cleaner, I don't care. And then answer that question and then say why. What you'll end up finding is it's usually the human. They were really kind. They really helped you. They gave you a discount because there was a problem. They went the extra mile. They followed up when they said they would. They did what they said they were going to do. It's the human that delivers the brand promise of we are the best at whatever. We will always be there for you. The person or the thing, right, that is there for you in that scenario is not a PowerPoint or a sign on the door or a statement on your website. It's a human being. So that to me is the easiest way to define that experience. And then it's also the easiest way for me to highlight the difference between a product experience and then what goes around that is usually human enabled and now tech enabled, the combo of both, levels that up. And so if we all stick with those examples, we can take this conversation even deeper because, you and I really agree that customer experience gets talked about a lot, but it doesn't necessarily mean everybody agrees with what that actually means.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love both those examples. It really does bring it to life. I think one example, some may say it's overused, but and it's an American one, so maybe some of our European listeners won't know it. But the example of what Zappos did in the early years within their existence to go that extra mile, it's about, as you say, that's wrap around peripheral service over and above the product. It's what they did for their customers. Can you give our listeners a quick overview of what Tony Hsieh did then? He was the then CEO of Zappos, but he just turned the company on its head to make customer service the company's main product.
Yeah, so Zappos is a shoe reseller, and I'm being very specific. They do not make their own shoes. They do not make anything themselves. Everything is someone else's product. And so where do you compete? If you could buy the same shoes at 5 other places, online or offline, why go to Zappos? Well, it has the largest variety of shoes. Okay. But you could then lean into, then they made the experience of purchasing shoes super easy. Like, you know what? You could buy 3, we'll ship you 3, keep the one you like, ship back the ones you don't. And oh, by the way, we won't charge you for the return shipment. Oh, well, that's frictionless, right? Like if I'm going to drive to the store and try on shoes, it's going to take me 2 hours, all that. I'll just pick the shoes. I know my size. I'll have them ship them to me. I'll keep the ones I like and I'll return the ones I don't. What a great experience. Because if you think about the product, there is no uniqueness in the product. Yeah. The only uniqueness is how easy is that service? And the call center agents, when they go through their interview process, I mean, this company is kind of like the Disney of retail for shoes. It is really known for its service. But when they get hired, they go through like an 8 or 10-week training program. And at the end of that training program, they offer everybody who has been offered a job a choice. You can keep the job because we'd love for you to stay, or we will write you a check for $2,500 right here, right now, on the spot, and you don't take the job. Now, what does that do? If you're there for the paycheck, they almost don't want you. Take the money and go. But if you believe in the mission and you're, engaged and you're excited about serving customers, the organization is flat, it's not hierarchical, everyone can make decisions. There's no KPI on how long they stay on the phone. One of the examples I gave in the book was the longest customer service call was like 10 hours. You're like, my God, what could you possibly be on the phone with for 10 hours? Well, what happened was it was like a wedding. The bride didn't get her shoes in time. She called in. They said, we are going to get them to you. We are going to get them to you. And we will stay on the phone until you get them. And they stayed on the phone until she got them. Wow. And so, even during the pandemic, they set up a hotline that some people were alone and they would call into the call center because they knew that those people would talk to them on the phone. They just talked to them about anything. And they started to promote it. Here's another line if you just want to call and talk. And then one day a doctor called and said, you're able to, make magic on so many things. Do you think you could find some ventilators for us? And the call service agent started dialing for dollars and found 5 ventilators for this hospital. So, it's an extreme example, but it is the culture of the organization was absolutely based on the experience. So much so, by the way, that Amazon bought them. Yeah. So, Amazon being another very strong customer experience organization. But what was great about that acquisition was they did buy them, but they really left them alone, right? So they've left them alone to continue on the journey that Tony Hsieh, he was the CEO at the time. He was not the founder, but he is the one who really oriented them around customer service and believed that was going to be their competitive differentiator because everybody sells shoes kind of a thing. It's kind of like everybody sells books. Go back to Amazon. Everybody sells books. There's no difference. What's the difference? It has to be the ease of finding it, the different mediums, Audible, Kindle, hard copy, all of those things. You could go to a bookstore, you could buy somewhere else. It is that experience. And that experience will get you new customers. It will keep customers. It will allow you to overcome when something goes wrong. They're more willing to try things from you because you've established this strong relationship. And that is where brands, I'm sure, again, going back to my little exercise of remember the last great experience you had. If you were to unpack that and ask yourself why, then ask your own company. Would one of your clients name your company's name if I asked them that question? If I said, hey, Nick, what's your favorite customer experience you've had in the last 2 weeks? And people are listening. Wouldn't you love, Nick, to say the name of your company? That's like Zappos, right? Or like Amazon or like Ritz or like, these other brands that we talk about. So that's the goal.
Yeah. Yeah. And I wasn't sure. I'd not heard the story about the ventilators. I knew that people could call them up under COVID, the customer service line and speak to them. But, they could source things like I don't know, flour for the home baking recipes that was hard to come by or anything like that. But I didn't realize they went to the nth degree to get ventilators. That's amazing. So we've been through different industrial revolutions over the ages, from mechanization in the 18th century, electrification, 19th century, automation in the 20th century. And here we are now in the 21st century. We're entering the fourth industrial revolution, therefore. We've got digitization, personalization, technology, AI, IoT. We can do anything now. And this has allowed companies to leverage technology to reduce customer effort, improve that experience. We're therefore, spending astounding amounts of money on CX technology. I think I read on one article recently, it's nearly 300 billion by 2026. So with all this investment that we're putting into CX, surely, people have never been so satisfied. CX scores never been so high? Am I correct?
Not always.
No,
Yeah,
I
I mean,
know.
I think,
It was a loaded question, but I mean, how are we failing so much?
Yeah. So this is what really led me to experience mindset. I was standing on stage one day and I said, I didn't think it was a coincidence that Salesforce is a great place to work globally. It was one of the most innovative companies in the world, and it's the fastest growing enterprise software company. And after I said that, in my head, I went, I wonder if I could prove it, right? I wonder if I could prove the great place to work created this environment for just incredible innovation, which means there's great collaboration and communication, and you're nimble and you're resilient, all those buzzwords from business, right?
Yeah.
All that has to happen for innovation. And then if you have a great place to work and you're innovating, the result of that would be the fastest growing enterprise software company. So the whole goal started on that very question, that hypothesis of, could I prove it? Look, there are hundreds, if not thousands of books around the power of customer experience and how an improved NPS score or customer satisfaction score will increase revenue. There are hundreds and maybe thousands of books about if you have happy employees, right? It reduces churn of your employee base. It gives you stability, if they are engaged, all that. But even with all the work we've done on employee satisfaction globally, including in Europe, has never passed 40% of employees. It's kind of in the low 30%. And in some regions, it's in the middle 20% of employees being extremely engaged at work. So the majority of people are collecting paychecks, kind of like that Zappos example. They would have taken the $2,500 and they would have walked out the door.
Yeah.
Funny enough, though, at Zappos, that doesn't happen very often because they recruit well. So the people they get are the right kinds of people, right? So that's another conversation. But I would say that if you look at that, then you can say, well, what are the pieces and parts? And most companies will be like, well, we have a chief customer officer, we have a chief marketing officer, we have a customer advisory board. All of our executives are, compensated and measured on net promoter score or how happy our customers are. And we're going to spend $300 billion worldwide on customer experience technology and ways to track the journey and, agencies and all this, right? It's big business.
Yeah.
But what we found from the research is that in order to kick off that flywheel of improving customer experience, you have to start with employee. Customer experience being good does not lift employee experience. So if you have unhappy employees in your call center and they're not very nice to your clients, what happens? They don't buy from you again. Again, even if you had the greatest product, you're not going to be able to answer and do everything for employees, similar to the fact that you can't do everything always for your customer. Even if your customer is always right, your employee always right, that we know that that's not true, right? So yeah. It was the balance between those two things. So when I started to share this globally, here's what I heard. Well, it's painfully obvious, Tiffani. Why isn't everyone doing it? And I go, well, I don't know. That's what I'm trying to find out, right? But because it's been this hard pivot to customer experience to do two things, by the way, the billions spent, reduce effort for customer. Don't make them click 9 times to buy something. Make it 1 click. Say it to their watch, say it to, a device in their house, whatever, right? Make it super easy, low effort. If you do that, and then you give them 2-hour delivery, same day delivery, next day delivery, much better than it used to be 7 to 10 days. Experience goes up. But unfortunately, what we did, for all intent and purposes, is we took that effort from the customer and we lifted it and shifted it over to the employee. So if it used to be the customer had to do 7 things, now the customer does 1, who does those 6? It usually ends up over at the employee. So what happened was the effort for the employee went up, and then what happens? Their experience goes down. So at each of those revolutions, right, the industrial, the digital, all of that, what we were doing is we were pushing for productivity improvement at the employee layer. Then right around kind of the late 1990s, what shifted was, as we started to digitize, is that all of a sudden the customer came in front and the employee got further and further and further behind, where we started to make investments and innovate at the customer layer, not necessarily at the employee layer. So now that's why there's this, great resignation, and people are quitting, and they're afraid of technology and they're afraid of AI because we weren't taking them along, even though we've been using these technologies for customers for well over 20 years. I mean, I sold my first domain name in 1997. I was selling cloud services in 2000 to 2004. I was really early. So to me, this has been a 25-year journey. But for some, especially small businesses and in some regions, this is a new journey for them. So if you're hearing this for the first time, it means you can make decisions today so you don't have to fix things 10 years from now, where your competitors are fixing mistakes and bad decisions they made a decade ago. It gives you an opportunity to win and in this category of experience because you have less bad debt to clear out.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's such a great point, that these improvements that some customers are seeing, we're not always aware. We think it's this magic of tech, and tech is amazing. But as you say, there's still employees that sit behind doing some of the repetitive, mind-numbing delivery, an email receipt or something when someone places an order and things like that. So I think the pandemic, like you say, it really reminded every company that they're in the people business, and that as the Great Resignation happened, and we need to look after our employees, and especially there's so many stats banded around, but I think it's between 90 to 200% of an employee's base salary that you lose every time you employ, training someone new, and that's not even to say the learning curve that they're going on, all that knowledge you're losing. So it really is important. And I think,
yeah, and I would tell you that if you're listening to this, you're like, oh, this is a big enterprise problem, right? Or this is for big companies with big dollars and big spend. And I'm a small, mid-sized business. I might be an entrepreneur. I might be a solopreneur. I'm just going to use like a plumber as an example. I'm a plumber. I've got a truck. It's me. I kind of service my neighborhood. I'm competitively priced, but I'm sitting there going, unless someone's calling me because they have an issue, I'm not making any money. So, there's these new devices that you can put under sinks and put in bathrooms that will, alarm you or create an alert if there's a water leak, right? So it senses water. So I'm that plumber, and I say, you know what? I'm going to use technology. I'm going to call all my clients, all my customers, and I'm going to say, I've got a new service. I will come to your house and I will install all these monitors for leaks, right? In some parts of the world, it will actually help your home insurance, right? But let's just say that I'm going to help all your leaks. And by the way, if there's a leak, it won't wake you up at 2:00 in the morning. It will alert me. And for that, I'm going to charge you, I don't know, $4.99 a month, $5 a month, $6 a month. Like, what's it worth to you? And when it gives me a notification, I will reach out to you and say, I've gotten a notification from your second bathroom. Can you go look and verify that something is happening or not happening? If something's happening, I guarantee I'll be there within 2 hours or something like that. Okay. Yeah. So now you've taken an individual plumber who has a truck, no staff, low grade, manual labor, not very technical, but now I've created a recurring revenue stream of $5 a month for my 50 clients in my little neighborhood. That's nice money. I've got an app, right? I now am getting notified. It's proactively telling me when there's a leak. So before there's massive water damage because they're out of town or something like that, I can fix it before that happens. So there's not flooding or not big damage. And so now what did I just win on? Did I win on price? No, I might even be a little more expensive. What did I win on? I won on experience, right? I won on, well, I could go with a cheaper plumber, but it wouldn't give me the same experience. He doesn't have those little monitors. I don't have an app. I don't have peace of mind. It's absolutely worth $5 a month for me or $10 a month for me. And by the way, he charges a premium. So I could get another plumber for $100 and this guy's $160. totally worth the extra $60,
Yeah.
right? So I don't want you to hear what we're talking about as it's reserved for, global enterprises or billion-dollar businesses. This is where small businesses actually can win against the big guys, because you have the ability to do what that plumber could do much easier than if you had 1,000 trucks and 1,000 plumbers to train and 1,000, that you had to get up to speed on the technology and 1,000 trucks to now have this new capabilities, et cetera, et cetera. Easier for one. And so then maybe he does so well and everyone's like, oh, he's the best. I could get another truck and find another truck and I could get another truck. Now all of a sudden I'm in 3 counties, right? And I was in 1. And now it's easier because I can just tell my client to turn off the water and I'll be there later today, or it was a false alarm. And what great service. So that's sort of an example I like to use when some of the pushback is everything you're talking about is too expensive for me to do.
Yeah, no, it is a great example and a great reminder. And I think, that one example of the plumber, but to SMBs, through to corporates, SMBs, you might only be employing 2 people, but that employee experience still needs to, come from the core in order to deliver the customer experience. And there's lots of famous quotes about the importance of employees. Herb Kelleher, Southwest Airlines, we did the rebranding for the research for the rebranding where you've got the hearts on the underside of the planes for Southwest. We did focus groups and all throughout the States on that. But he famously said, if you treat your employees right, guess what? Your customers come back, makes your shareholders happy. Start with employees and the rest follows from that. And, Richard Branson, take care of your employees, they'll take care of the clients. So as we said it up front, didn't we? It's obvious. It seems but it's counter to how most businesses operate today. Can you tell our listeners a bit more? We've talked about customer experience. What is employee experience? What's delivering a superior employee experience?
Yeah, and this was really critical, right? And I want to be very clear here. I am not a people expert. I'm not an HR expert, and I'm not a culture expert. It's not my lane. My lane is growth. It's usually sales, marketing, and customer service. But what's funny about that is sales has people, marketing has people, customer service is people. So, again, I was so fixated on CX that I just missed the other side. And it's not that I didn't intuitively, like in my first book, I used the Herb Kelleher quote and the Richard Branson quote. And I said that, right? You have to have happy employees to do this, but I didn't dig in deep enough to realize that without it, there's no way to achieve what you want to achieve on customers. So I'm going to pick technology just because it's sort of in everything we do today. So the disconnect between what executives think and what the employees think as it relates to technology, it's like 52% of executives believe the technology that they've deployed is working effectively in the organization. Only 32% of the general employee base agrees with that statement. And only 20% of customer-facing employees agree that the technology they've been given allows them to collaborate effectively. So if you're listening to this and you're an employee and you work for a company, I ask you, how many tabs do you have currently open on your desktop? And I don't mean like, shopping tabs. I mean work tabs. Like how many do you have open? And then I will say to you that to switch from tab to tab, like to do your work, takes about 2 milliseconds for your brain to catch up between tab to tab. Your eyes will see you're on a new tab, takes your brain, 2 milliseconds to catch up with, oh, yep, I'm on a new tab and here's what I'm looking at. Over the course of a week, it's like 4 hours of time that your brain spends switching. And over the course of a year, it's like 5 weeks. So your company is asking you to be more productive, yet you're wasting 5 weeks of time switching applications. So technology was the biggest productivity joy drainer in the business, right? Because it's like one product says, one calls me Tiff Bova, one calls me Tiffani Bova, one has, a Los Angeles address, one has a New York address, like which one's right? All of the things as an employee, I have to jump through 3 hoops to get approval to do a return because it's over $50 and I have to chase someone down. So the customer's on the phone for like 10 minutes waiting, where if you just fix the broken process or you consolidated all the data to one place and I could do this in one application, then it would save me all this time. The customer would have a better experience. And trust me, I would be happier at work. And if I'm happier at work, I'm happier with the customer. The fastest way to get customers to love your brand is to get employees to love their job. Full stop. So technology was a big one. The other was career development. Like, you've now deployed something, a new technology to make their lives easier, but then you don't train them. Or you don't give them an opportunity to give feedback on, well, if we're going to use this new tool, can we get rid of that tool? Or if we're going to use this new tool, can we connect the two? Or can we fix this broken process? So we survey employees. What you just said a few minutes ago, you used to do, company-wide surveys. 87% of executives say they survey their employees and do nothing with the data they find.
Yeah.
So they get surveyed and then they don't look at it and look for ways to improve it. So I'm not talking about pay, equity and inclusion, all those things, super important, not the point of experience mindset. Experience mindset was about that moment that matters when an employee in some way touches a customer, your front desk person, right? Your drivers, the person who designs your products or your website, anything that they do that touches the customer in some way. That moment is where I'm talking about that experience mindset, not everything HR. So if you keep that in mind, it'll be, what are the things we can do? It's people, process, technology, and culture. Those are the 4 levers that have to work very tightly, that if you do really well on culture and you fail on technology, it doesn't work. If you do really well on people and technology and process, and you have a toxic culture, it doesn't work. So all 4 can never be totally even, but you want them to ebb and flow together, where if something happens in one, the other 3 follow along, that you don't just let one break away and get really good. Like, we're going to invest 300 million or 300 billion in customer experience technology, and we're not going to do anything for our people. Right.
Yeah.
That disconnect, it manifests itself in slowed growth, no growth, unhappy customers, and most definitely unhappy employees.
B2B Frameworks is a curated collection of proven business frameworks to develop your strategic thinking skills, solve your biggest business problems, and unlock your next promotion. Our mission is to help you achieve these goals. We want to create the next generation of successful business leaders by providing the tools and frameworks needed to create effective strategies that drive business growth. Each framework comes with a downloadable set of instructions with large, colourful diagrams and editable templates to guide you through the process step by step and prompt you to consider the problem from every possible angle. Along with audio guides and educational tools, our extensive content library is full of real-world examples and case studies of strategic thinking in action. So why learn with B2B Frameworks? We've carefully curated only the most effective, proven business and marketing frameworks. Our downloadable materials and audio guides will help you easily apply each framework. And the insights and advice you'll find across the site are based on 30 years of consulting experience from one of the world's leading business strategy experts, Paul Haig. B2B Frameworks is a small investment to advance your career or grow your business. Start your journey to becoming a successful business leader by joining B2B Frameworks today. Yeah. And I think, there's so many examples in the book that you use. I think Ritz-Carlton's always been on pedestal as the gold standard for customer service, but that's because they look after their employees. They empower their employees. And I think, is it something like each employee has up to $2,000 to fix a customer's problem before alerting a manager. So, it's that empowerment of people, giving them, that control so that they can look after and that helps them, they're helping others, and that helps them in their job as well to get gratification, have a purpose in their role as well.
Yeah, I was talking to someone yesterday, as a matter of fact, and they were saying, I asked the question, what was the last experience you had and worst? And he said, it was my car dealership. I'd been going to this car dealership, where I got it. They've been servicing my car. It was under new ownership. It was such a bad service experience. I'll never go back.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, let's unpack that, right? Was it a new owner who looked at the business from a profitability standpoint and how many customers and all of that? And then they cut all the things in the service department that we're kind of that Ritz-Carlton example. Oh, we told you your car would be done at noon. It's not done till 5 p.m. We're going to give you a $50, gift certificate for your next oil change, or we've detailed your car. We're really sorry. They took all that away from them. They just said, nope, if the car's late, the car's late. Let them know, move on.
Yeah.
So what happened, right? They took away that empowerment from the employees that work in the car service department, not your front office salespeople, not the finance people, the guys that are, and girls that are greasy all day, right, at the front line working with customers and their cars. And then they communicate through, right? And just that simple example was, I'll never go back. So I'm like, you're not going to go back because of that experience. He's like, it's totally different now. It doesn't have the same feel, doesn't have the same vibe. People aren't happy. He's like, I'm just not going to go back.
Yeah.
So there's a great example of someone bought that business. It was doing really well, and they paid attention to the financials and to the productivity, and they absolutely ripped away the culture and took away the empowerment of the people, like that Ritz-Carlton example. And the result is you'll lose clients.
I've seen it with clients, where I've called at their offices and there's just, a telephone there with some numbers to call, and there's not even a receptionist anymore to even meet and greet you. And I've had that same experience with my car. I think they thought they'd streamline the experience on a service. I went to pick it up. It was meant to be a contactless delivery where my keys would be in a box that would automatically open when I put a code into the screen. That didn't work. I then had to join a 10-long queue to speak to the one service operator to say, I can't get my keys out of the box. So the whole thing fell apart. And yeah, I can totally relate to that for sure.
And so so then by the time you get to the one guy, right, or girl who's working behind that counter and it's 10 deep in the queue, how happy are you?
Yeah.
Right. You're not. And so you're just unloading on this poor employee who's been yelled at like 9 times before you. And they're just like, look, there's nothing. I've told them that is, those lock boxes don't work. No one listens to me. Right. Or, I've said maybe we could have 2 people, or we could have me behind the counter and then someone out front to, sort of streamline that. And no one's listening. Nope. We can only do one person. We're cutting costs. It's about profitability. It's about productivity. Yeah, so they're not listening to the employee. And so that employee won't stay very long. I guarantee you, if you went back 6 weeks later, I doubt that employee would still be there, because they'd be like, oh, I am not doing this. This is no fun. I'm yelled at all day, every day, and no one listens to me on how to fix it. I'm out.
Yeah. There's many statistics banded around that emphasize the importance of EX, like employees most committed to their organizations put in 50% more effort. We've just been talking about 80% less likely to resign than employees who consider themselves disengaged. And business leaders acknowledge this link, but little research has been done on this until now. So this piece of research you did whilst you were at Salesforce showed this link between EX, CX, and increased profits and growth. Can you tell us a bit more about the research itself, the findings itself?
Yeah. So after I made that statement on stage, I said, we're going to go out and prove it. We did a small study, US only, publicly traded companies specifically. And we looked at a few things. We looked at, what was their net promoter score, or NPS, their customer satisfaction scores. Then we looked at their employee satisfaction scores and their Glassdoor rating, which is a group that does kind of best places to work. Yeah. Anything that was publicly available, we got our hands on. And then which is why we had to do publicly traded companies. And then we looked at their 3-year compounded annual growth rate, or CAGR. So we looked at their percentage of growth rate. We then mapped it against their, customer scores and their employee scores. And we mapped it in a 2x2, right? The right would be those that perform really well on CX, really well on EX, and, oh, by the way, had greater growth rates. Now, that greater growth rate was 1.8 times more than the rest. So for a $1 billion brand, it's a $40 million impact. And if you're not a $1 billion brand and you're a $5 million brand, you can see that it has a 1.8 times. So if you're growing at 4%, you're going to get a lift on that. Now, in the other 3 boxes, it might be high CX, low EX, high EX, low CX, and then low on both, right? Which is also possible. By the way, all 4 grew. It's not like they're not growing. So what I want you to hear is, you will still grow if you have happy customers and unhappy employees. You will still grow if you have unhappy employees and happy customers, right? you're just not going to grow as fast as if you had both those things right. And if you continue to have unhappy customers over a long period of time, then you have a problem, right? Or vice versa, you have unhappy employees for a long period of time, you have a different problem. But that 1.8x made us go, could we dig into what is the connection and what is the causation and correlation? So in what I just said of, happy customer, happy employee gives you 1.8x faster growth rate. At that point, we thought the flywheel, as I said a few minutes ago, could start either with happy employee and give you happy customers or vice versa. And the sort of figure eight flywheel would happen. We went into the second piece of research thinking that was true. And we found in the second piece of research, one, could we prove causation? And two, could it start with customer or employee and work? We found in the second one that not to be true. As I said, it has to start with employee.
Right.
That is the only way to get the flywheel moving. Yeah. Because if your employees are unhappy, even if your customers are happy, over time, it will start to diminish your ability to continue to improve customer experience. What we also were able to prove was this true causation between a retailer in the US that had 1,000 locations. I don't know who it was, but there's only a handful that have that many. And they exclusively focused on understanding the employee part of the equation. So in retail, it's a very transactional employment base. So it might be a summer job or a part-time job. So they looked at tenure, they looked at training, they looked at career development, they looked at what tools they were using, like did they have an iPad or an iPhone or a smartphone right on the floor so they could order for the customer or find something right away versus walking away. So it was a handful of things that they did. So they started to improve that. And they saw a 50% improvement in revenue per employee, per head, per hour.
Wow.
So we could absolutely prove causation between all they changed. Now you could argue, was it, and we tried to not do holiday season and back to school, you know what I mean, where you'd get a natural bump. We tried to, or they did, right? They did it in a time frame that we could try to remove as much noise as we could to get as clean of data as we could. And so this was, if not the first, it might have been the second of actually being able to prove causation between, if you can enhance on the employee side, you will not only have happier customers, you will absolutely see greater profitability and greater revenue growth.
Yeah. So, we've been speaking for over half an hour now, Tiffani, and most of our conversation is about CX, isn't it? So, there's no denying the majority of companies have woken up to this CX differentiator. They have CX departments, they might have someone that looks after CX, even in an SMB, and they might not have a CX title. It might be, part of the marketing manager's domain or something like that. But when it comes to employees, this employee experience department is still a rarity, if non-existent. But there is this one example in the book you talk about on how Brian Chesky, CEO of Airbnb, brought in Mark Levy to be this first head of employee experience. He wanted to bring him in his words, so he didn't fuck up the culture. I think it's really powerful, this story on how they shifted this mindset from being HR matter to something that was embedded and embraced in the entire organization. Can you talk around that?
Yeah. And the foundation of that would be the following, that lots of companies spend, as we've been talking about, a lot of time and energy on customer experience. They'll have customer advisory boards. They spend money on, journey mapping, how the customer enters and exits and buys and returns. And they know all this information and data. So my challenge was, why don't they do it the same thing on the employee side and treat the employee like an internal customer, like give it the same kind of rigor and mind share, if you will, as you do on the customer. So what Airbnb had was they had kind of an employee advisory board where employees would sit on it, similar to you had a customer advisory board. And that employee advisory board was individual contributors from all over the organization that when something was going to change at Airbnb, it went through this EAB, right? But they called it something else. I call it an employee advisory board. And so it could be, we're going to launch this product and they go, well, hold on a second. And they start talking about what we were just mentioning. Do we need another product there? Are we going to integrate it? Is there going to be training? I don't think we need it. Like, I think we should do this instead. And not that they had full veto power, but what they wanted to do was to get employee input. And not only that, to get buy-in. So if the EAB went thumbs up, the rest of the organization went, well, okay, this isn't just something executives are tossing over the fence. The EAB has given a thumbs up. We trust that process. So when things were introduced, employees were more willing to embrace it. So, and then, it really became kind of this, it was part of the culture. Now at Airbnb, what's interesting there is the hosts, right? The homeowners or apartment owners around the world are kind of quote unquote employees as well. So how do you get the hosts into this process so that they can give feedback, right? Because at the end of the day, the host has the interaction with the person who's staying, not Airbnb, right? It's the host that leaves the keys or cleans the place, right? It's totally out of Airbnb's control. So they needed to make sure that they were treated as closely as they could to employees as well. And when Airbnb went public on the New York Stock Exchange, all the hosts around the world rang their doorbells at the time that Airbnb rang the bell at the New York Stock Exchange to sort of show that we're in this together. We're all part of this sort of family of Airbnb. And that tells you that employee experience, the broader employee set, in a gig economy or really full-time employees or partners or people you work with in the community, you have to think about all of them. So I just say anything you do for customer, you should say, am I doing the same thing for employee? Yeah. Metrics, training, improvement, journey mapping, advisory boards, anything you're doing on one side, make sure you're also doing on the other. So, while you say that we're talking a lot about customer experience, I try to never talk about it without bringing in an employee angle, right? Because ultimately the goal is not, I just want to have amazingly happy and engaged employees and no products and no customers and no revenue. Like that's not the goal, right? It's I want to grow my business. I want to have really happy customers. And I need those two things to be very symbiotic between the employee and the customer. And the way to do that is to view them as external customer, internal customer, and making sure that you're making as much of an equal investment as you possibly can.
Well, and to that point, I mentioned Ritz-Carlton and, the empowering their employees. I think Airbnb did something similar. What they gave $2,000 to, but all employees for them to travel to the customers' homes, didn't they, as well? And, have those conversations, get feedback, give special guests to their host to bring them on board. So, as you say, whatever you do for customers, you've got to do the same for employees.
Well, but I'll thread this through. Zappos, Ritz, Airbnb, they hire right.
Yeah.
So they hire people who understand the vision and the mission and are willing to be that kind of employee and ambassador for the brand and all of those things. And so if you hire right, you don't have to fire fast, right? Or fire later. So, and depending on where you are in the world, right, you can't really fire, but you get the point. Someone has to go. New role, different role, manage them in, out. So, ultimately therein lies. That's why I said it's people, process, technology, and culture. So the culture would be, what kind of people do we want to hire, right? The ones that will go the extra mile, that are very collaborative, that are willing to learn and train and do new things. So when you join Ritz, equally as comprehensive as training as Zappos, so there is commonality. So in listening to this, the reason I use those stories is you're able to pull those examples and apply them to your organization. Are we hiring the right people? What kind of people do we want? Well, if they join and then we just absolutely squash their curiosity and their collaborative nature and their interest in going the extra mile because we make it so difficult for them, shame on us.
Yeah.
Right. So you want to make sure the culture is right. So that you are attracting the right talent, you are empowering that talent, you're training that talent, you have career development for that talent, they have joy in what they do, they're getting paid a fair wage. All of those things have to be in place. And if you can do that, your attrition goes down significantly. And then people want to work at your company. You're not finding it difficult to find talent.
Yeah.
right? People want to work there. Like that's the true test that you have a company that has turned the corner on that experience.
100%. And I think I mentioned, we were the research company that did the research around Southwest when it was a rebrand. It was a branding project, but we spoke to customers, we spoke to employees. And I think, what was really insightful when speaking to the HR manager, the HR director at the time, she said, we actually don't look to hire anyone that's worked for other airlines before. We want to hire hairdressers and people that can think on the feet, that can hold a conversation, because it's about the experience. And I read a lot of books as well, part of the show, and for pleasure as well. I'm reading The Founders at the moment, and I think in that book as well, we're talking about the formation of PayPal, and they taught that speed was everything. But apart from when they hire the people, you need to hire right. You need to make sure you got the right people on the bus in order to drive the organization forward. So in terms of and you've touched on it before, actually, we're talking about this experience mindset, and the fact that this model that you developed that encapsulates how we develop the experience mindset. You've talked about it. It's an evolution of Harold Levitt's diamond model. So the people, the process, the technology, and the culture, and they've got to be this balanced and unified approach. Is one more important than the other, do you think, or?
Well, he had people, process, tech. I added culture.
Yeah.
Very similar to what I did in Growth IQ, my first book, which was really a play on the Ansoff matrix, which was 4 boxes of that. So I'm sort of I'm an anthropologist, historian on business strategy. And then I say, how do I modernize it, knowing we have mobile and social and cloud and big data and all analytics and all the things we now have at our fingertips? It's not that those strategies are no longer relevant. It's that we have to modernize them to the fact that back then you'd have to build your own manufacturing and your own R&D and have your own shipping and all of those things. And now, one of the examples in my first book was Kylie Jenner, who you could argue up and down how much revenue it was, but let's call it $500 million with 12 employees. So you couldn't do that 60 years ago. It would be impossible, especially for that. And in her industry, in sort of, in beauty, the getting to $1 billion, she did it, I think 6 or 7 times faster. Like the other first one was I think it was Chanel, and it was, took them 15 years. It took her 2. Yeah. So you kind of have to go the speed, to your point, but technology is what changes it. So he had people, process, tech. I added culture, because people and culture to me are different. People are what do you do for them, like switching tabs, the technology. Culture is who do you hire? What kind of people are we looking for? Are we going to give them $2,000? Are we going to have employee advisory boards? Are we going to do surveys and then actually listen to the surveys? Are we going to, balance our efforts? Like that's culture, not people. And so to answer your question, I don't like to put one ahead of the other. As he said, one can never get too far out of line of the other 2 when he had 3. I say the same thing. One cannot, or 2 cannot get out of line to the other 2. So it kind of is like an organism that if one pulls, the other have to go with it. And it's never going to be balanced 25%, 25%, 25%, 25%. And it's never going to be 50% CX and 50% EX. But what I don't want to have happen is what's happening now, where it's like 90% customer focus and 10% on the employees. Or we're so focused on technology that we forget about process and people. Or we're so focused on culture that we're just tossing out all this technology and people are unhappy. So going back to, I want you to consider each with every decision that you make. And you may say, no impact. Great, let's move on. You may say, there's an impact, but it's small. Let's keep an eye on it. Or you may say, there's a big impact. We would have really gotten caught had we not asked this question. So let's make some adjustments before we do whatever it is we do. If I can get you to ask a question of what's the intended and unintended consequence with every decision you make across those 4 axes, and you just ask the question, this has been a successful podcast.
Yeah.
If you hear what I said and you go, yeah, we do it, I'd say you would be one of a, very small minority of companies that get this right, which is why when anybody talks about this, it's always the same group of 50 companies. It's a Unilever, it's a Hair, it's a Ritz-Carlton, it's a Southwest, it's a, Virgin, it's a handful of companies. It's a Chewy, it's a Zappos, it's a, and so there's a reason. It's very hard to do and to do it consistently. And even with Southwest, 18 months ago, they ran into a big hiccup. So even though they're cream of the crop, they got caught. Employees weren't happy, customers weren't happy. And how do they recover from that? They'd never faced something like that before. So, it's not only that you have to build it, but you have to be self-aware enough to know that you've gotten into trouble. You need to back up. You need to communicate. You need to fix. You need to adjust. You need to move on. Starbucks is in the middle of it on their third CEO in less than 2 years because they lost their way on CX in my first book. In my second book, they lost their way on EX. And right now they've lost their way on both. So, a company that you would have held up in this conversation is floundering, right now, trying to get themselves back on track.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I'm so glad that you put that fourth pillar of culture to the model, because I know from starting a company from just 3 people through to, being an international company employing over 120 offices around the world, yes, people, technology, process, it's all crucial cogs to make the company work. But I think our culture was one of the real reasons why we're successful. We worked hard together. We looked after each other. We had some fun together, but we were all aligned in terms of that brand purpose and mission. And that's what drove us there.
Well, and you asked this question, and I'll just round that off where, obviously I'm not at Salesforce anymore, but when I was, and we did this research, right? Best places to work on the globe, most innovative companies in the world, fastest growing enterprise software company, only stood up the employee experience team after the research. Right. So, yeah. So look, even a high performing organization that is humming on all cylinders, if you ask the right questions, you see there's opportunity for improvement. So if you're listening to this and you're growing, don't get caught success is the worst teacher. That was said by Bill Gates. Don't be someone who's like, we're growing, I don't need to worry about that. Or our customers and employees are super happy, I don't need to worry about that. Like complacency will catch you, right? So always be looking for ways to improve, even when you are a great place to work, one of the most innovative companies in the world and the fastest growing enterprise software company. And then they started to focus very specifically on what parts of the employee experience were the most broken. And they started all the way from onboarding and then working their way through, right? But there was a lot of hiring during COVID. Lots of acquisitions were done, Slack, Tableau. And so lots of people joined. They didn't go through the normal onboarding process. Everything was remote. People weren't as happy. Let's try and fix that, right? And so I say that as an example that even a Ritz-Carlton, in the example in the book, if something was going wrong, Hortz, who was the COO, who kind of came up with a lot of this at the time, he was one of the co-founders, he would show up at the hotel and live there until it turned around.
Yeah.
And so, Airbnb CEO will go stay and be a guest. Uber CEO will order an Uber. It's sort of go out there and see if what you're being told by your people is the reality of what's happening day to day for your customers and your employees.
And we've talked about this experience mindset shift. We've argued with our C-suite board. They're on board now. We know it's not a quick fix, so we're in it for the long duration. How do we make sure we keep on track? Is it the usual CX and EX metrics that we need to measure?
Well, I usually start and I ask a couple questions. One, I'll say, before we have this conversation, if I'm sitting with a room of executives, I'll ask them, so tell me what your top 3 metrics are that you manage the business on a daily basis. And that tells me a lot, right? Because that will drive behavior. Like what they're measuring will drive behavior. And then if it's not in the top 3, I'll go, okay, do you actually measure customer experience, like a net promoter score or customer? Oh, yeah, of course we do. I go, great. Is it part of your individual compensation, right? Like, so you sold, X amount of dollars, but your customers are totally unhappy. Does it matter? Or if they're really happy and you sold a ton, do you get some kind of benefit for that, right? So I try to understand what are the metrics, to your point. Yeah. And then if they have customer in there, I'll go, great. Do you track anything for employee? And they usually will say attrition, like how many people are leaving, right? Because it's an easy metric to track. We have 100. At the end of the year, we have 90. We lost 10%. Like, okay, next year we had 100. We lost 5. We lost 5%. We're better. right? So it might be something like that. And then I'll say, okay, but do you have like an employee satisfaction metric? No, no, no. And a lot of that has to do with most companies don't, if you're large enough, don't have an HR person sitting at the C-suite table. So they're not in that conversation about people. They report into the CEO or the COO or someone else. Marketing usually has a seat at the table, which means customer experience is far more talked about. And the people side of the business is talked about very differently. So right away, I start with the metric. And if they're not tracking anything on employee, I know I have a much harder time of getting this conversation going in the right direction, because now I have to introduce completely new concepts to them. Whereas if they have some employee metrics, then I can start to up level them to match what we're doing on the customer side. If they're currently doing both, then I start to dig into some of the things we just talked about. Do you see that when employee dips, 2 or 3 quarters later, your customer dips? Do you see when your customer metric dips a few quarters later, your employee dip? I try to get them to think about them in a more connected way. And you see the wheels start turning. They never correlated the two. So, those little things start to move an organization down the path. But that's why I called it mindset. It isn't about land grab, more power, a new title, a new role, it was about the company changing how they approach the connection between the employee and the customer.
Tiffani, to conclude, I'd like to enter the quickfire round of questions I ask all my guests. So we've talked about your book, The Experience Mindset and Growth IQ. What are you reading at the moment?
This is going to sound terrible because I read so much for work. I don't read for pleasure as much as I would like to.
Yes.
And, I read a lot of white papers and a lot of research papers and a lot of, I read business books in preparation for my own podcast. So, it's churning and burning a lot of reading. And I will tell you what's really great is I think books, especially on the business side, are having new kinds of conversations, not just rehashing old. But there are some that still continue to come out with that same kind of mindset, right? Of it's one or the other, right? It's customer first, employee first. It's like, it isn't a first second, it's an and play. And so that frustrates me if I read that and it's an or, not an and. But I'd say there's so much good work out there that I'm just happy if people are curious enough to want to pick something up and get a new point of view. And if you get past the 50th page of a book, then the author has done a good job of hooking you to the story. If you don't get past sort of page 45 or 50, you won't finish the book. So lots of books I've started and not finished. And then those that I finish quick, right? Because they have me engaged. And I'm off to the races. I'm learning something new.
Well, to your point there, my very first guest when I started this new podcast is Wendy Smith from Both and Thinking fame. And I know she's a Thinker's 50 as well. That's
well, I mean, I have my favorites, anything by Tom Peters, anything by Liz Wiseman, Rita McGrath, Whitney Johnson. I've got like sort of in the thinker's ilk. I've read all those, right? And so if you don't know what that is, there's a list called the Thinker's 50 list. It's got the 50 top management thinkers around the world. I've been blessed to be on the list 3 times. And any books in there are very business oriented, right? It'll be around psychological safety, Amy Edmondson. It'll be around multipliers, Liz Wiseman, seeing around corners, Rita McGrath. There's, In Search of Excellence, Tom Peters, anything by him. Seth Godin, anything by him. Dan Pink, anything by him. Adam Grant, anything by him. Like you could just sort of pick. They're sort of the foundation and the giants that I stand on the shoulders of, if you will. Sometimes they're a little academic for me. I like stories. I'm not a big data junkie. I like tell me the data in a story. So I try to do that in my books to try to get people past page 50. But there's lots of stuff out there to read.
What's the best piece of business advice you've been given?
Well, my grandfather gave it to me when I was a child. Patience is a virtue, which I still haven't learned. So you could say that that's good business advice. But trust the process is sort of one that's kind of like patience, because I want things to happen faster than they do. And when I meet with executives and they kind of go, yeah, sounds interesting. And I'm like, I want to shake them. No, you have to listen. I'd say those are probably the 2: patience and trust the process.
Which business leader do you most admire and why?
Oh, there's a lot. I am to just be pretty candid here. I'm an admirer of there just recently this week, the new list of the Fortune most powerful women in the world. I love that list because the stories are founder stories. They're stories of women who have moved up in the organization and gotten a shot at CEO and done really, really well. Unfortunately, globally, in the global 500, it's still I think it's down 2 or 3%. It's only around 10% of CEOs on a global basis. In the US, that number is like 45 or 50, which is great in the C-suite. I like looking at that because having been a female leader in tech, I was one of the very few early on. And it's a very different journey. So, whether it's Indra from Pepsi, whether it's Accenture or GM, CVS, you've got lots of female CEOs out there, Spanx. I mean, there's just across the board, there's just some wonderful ones. And then like Hubert Joly, who used to be with Best Buy, he's great. Hortz from Ritz. There are so many, and I've had the pleasure of meeting them and working with them and having them on my show as well. It is a pleasure and an honor and a joy to spend 45 minutes with them because I just want to take everything out of their brain and absorb it. Yeah. Because that's how I learn. I learn listening and visually, not reading. So any interaction I get with leaders, I'm all in.
And my final question is, who would you like me to reach out to and invite to come on this podcast in the future? You've got your own show, which has been the best guest or...
Oh, there's so many. And it just depends what topic. When I have friends on, it's a great conversation. So a Guy Kawasaki, a Seth Godin, a Rita McGrath, a Tom Peters, a Dan Pink, where they've become friends over time. And it's like we're having a cup of coffee and everyone's listening in. Like that's a much different than I don't know this person, right? I've read their book. I'm interviewing them and I'm trying to get to know the book more than, and I don't know them as well. Yeah. So I always say, interview people because I feel like that conversation is so much more light and fun and informative. And people who hear those podcasts of mine, they always comment on, I love listening when it's you and Seth or you and Guy or you and, because it sounds like you're just, shooting the breeze, having a cup of coffee. And I go, that's absolutely the goal. So I'm glad you enjoy it. So I'd say whoever, you have a really good rapport with, even if they're not, in the C-suite, but that kind of casualness and comfortableness is a great recipe for success on podcasts.
Well, Tiffani, we've not spoken before, but I've felt that it's been a great, fluid conversation as if we did know each other today.
I agree.
So it's just been fabulous having you on the show. For all the listeners, I hope they've learned today that it's not enough to just focus on the customer. That's come through very clearly. If you want to win in today's modern world, then you need to adopt this experience mindset that strengthens both EX and CX at the same time. Taking them out of the separate silos, we need to integrate as one whole solution. We've talked about the book today. If people are interested in learning more, then they should obviously go and buy the book. But where else can they reach out, get information about the work that you do?
Yeah, you can follow me on social media, LinkedIn or X or Instagram. I've got a podcast called What's Next with Tiffani Bova, or you can go to tiffanibova.com and see my latest work and writings. And also I've got a channel on Spotify that has all my guest podcasts as well, that this one will show up on in case you want to sort of hear more from me. So those are really the ways in which you can follow my work.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure, Tiffani. I love the book. I listen to your podcast on a weekly basis. So, thank you very much for coming on this podcast. And I hope our paths cross soon.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, Nick. It's been a pleasure.
This podcast has been brought to you in partnership with Awards International. Awards International is dedicated to running successful business awards programs and conferences. Founded in 2008 by Don Hales and Neil Skihel, the company's core mission centers on honoring and celebrating exceptional achievements in customer and employee experience, but also in overall business excellence across diverse sectors. In addition, their aim is to showcase best practices, innovations, and achievements that contribute positively to these areas, ultimately inspiring other organizations to improve their own customer experience, employee engagement strategies, and overall business success. To find out more about Awards International and how to register your interest in their awards programs, check their website www.awardsinternational.com.